Today we take a look at yet another abandoned place, and this one is likely known to most of us via history class. We will explore Pripyat, Ukraine, which was a bustling city until the catastrophic explosion of Chernobyl caused a hasty and total evacuation. Pripyat is located in northern Ukraine near the Belarus border. It was founded on February 4th, 1970 as a nuclear city in the Soviet Union. In fact, it was the ninth such nuclear city founded in the Soviet Union. The nuclear site, Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, is about 2 miles from the city. Pripyat was officially declared a city in 1979. The town housed about 50,000 residents at the time of meltdown in 1986. It was home to the city's builders as well as Chernobyl's employees. It was a bustling city with so much packed into it, including its own hospital, schools to accommodate almost 12,000 children, 25 stores for shopping, 10 gyms, 10 shooting galleries, 2 stadiums, 35 playgrounds, a cinema, a school of arts, and so much more. There was even an Olympic-sized pool for the city. Pripyat also had an amusement park that never even got to see visitors. There were also 4 factories aside from the power plant that housed 4 reactors. The life that they had built for themselves all came crashing down in the early hours of April 26, 1986. The workers were going to test the electrical system, so they turned off vital control systems, which was entirely against regulation. Doing so caused the reactor to become unstable, and at 1:23 a.m., explosions occurred that destroyed the reactor and started a raging fire. The initial explosion killed 1 worker immediately and 1 soon after in the hospital, with many others dying over the next several days in the struggle to contain the fallout and control the fires. It took 10 days to control the fire and the toxic emissions that were being released from the now destroyed reactor. Evacuations of Pripyat started about 36 hours after the explosions. A lot of the residents had already started complaining about symptoms of radiation poisoning, such as vomiting and headaches. Because of how quickly they were needing to be evacuated, the residents were told to only bring what they absolutely needed. This meant the majority of their belongings were left behind, and this is still seen in the city today. Dust and debris affected the immediate area heavily, but the gas and dust was also carried over extreme distances. It was in the Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, but also made it over parts of Europe. It is the largest uncontrolled radioactive release by civilians into the environment ever. By May 14th of that year, an 18-mile area around the plant was closed off, and an additional 116,000 residents were evacuated. Over the next few years, another 220,000 were evacuated as the exclusion zone got larger. It currently covers 1,000 square miles. Earlier this year, there was actually a huge fire in the exclusion zone, which caused radiation levels there to spike about 16 times the normal level. Aside from the initial fallout of the evacuation itself, the cleanup was and is also an undertaking. Between 1986 and 1987, some 200,000 workers came from all over the Soviet Union to assist with the cleanup efforts and unfortunately received very high doses of radiation. Those who got the worst of it were the 1,000 or so emergency personnel and those already on site on the day of the accident. Later on, the number of workers involved in the cleanup was eventually 600,000, but they thankfully received low levels of radiation. In all, 30 people died from the accident. Aside from the 2 who died during and soon after the explosion, a further 28 died within weeks of the explosion from acute radiation syndrome. The radiation released from the explosion was mostly iodine-131, cesium-134, and cesium-137. Iodine-131 has a short half-life of 8 days, cesium-134 is 2 years, and cesium-137 is a whopping 30 years. If you don't know, a half-life is the amount of time it takes for a quantity to reduce to half of its initial value. So at this point, over 30 years since the explosion, only about half of the cesium-137 that was released has dissipated. While iodine-131 has the shortest half-life, it has a great effect due to how rapidly it is ingested via air. Cesium-134 137 with their longer half-lives are a concern for a much longer period and pose significant risks for years. As for long-term effects, the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation concluded that there was no evidence of a major public health impact aside from the 6,500 thyroid cancers in the years since. Many do say they still suffer from the effects of the radiation in their daily lives, however. The nuclear reactors used at Chernobyl were found to be inherently flawed. Instead of using water as a coolant like most nuclear reactors, these instead used graphite. As the core heated, more steam bubbles were created, making the core more reactive and thus more at risk for disaster. This is highly believed to be the cause of at least one of the explosions that fateful day. The remaining reactors of the same design have since been modified to account for the very things that caused this meltdown. They're said now to be near zero chance of them having any kind of disaster. The city and the disaster have had a lot of coverage over the years from TV shows, movies, and games. You're also able to take a guided tour through the city, and you need not be worried about the radiation, as the levels in the majority of the city aren't harmfully high, save for the highly contaminated areas like the reactor itself and the basement of the hospital. Those areas are off limits, and your radiation levels are checked when leaving. As I mentioned, there still remains a very large exclusion zone around Chernobyl and Pripyat called the Zone of Alienation that is around 1,000 square miles. Interestingly enough, and this is something I never knew, but the 3 other reactors actually remained in use due to energy shortages. Reactor 2 was closed in 1991 due to a fire, Reactor 1 was closed in 1997, and Reactor 3 was finally shut down December of 2000. Due to their continued use, a structure was hastily put up over Reactor 4 to contain it and protect it from the environment, since it is still full of radioactive material. In 2017, the new safe confinement structure was completed and was created to cover not only the reactor but the original structure put in place in 1986. The building is hermetically sealed and will allow the safe removal of the materials located in the bottom of the reactor. Full dismantling and demolition of reactors 1 through 3 is expected to be completed by 2064. What happened at Chernobyl was indeed a disaster. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to pick up and leave everything you own within 2 days of a catastrophe. Not to mention the everlasting concern of how the radiation would affect you in the long term. There is a silver lining, however. Due to the abandonment of the city and therefore lack of human intervention, the forest is slowly reclaiming the city and wildlife is returning. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for joining me to look at the abandoned city of Pripyat, Ukraine, and to hear about the Chernobyl disaster that caused the abandonment of the city. I'll catch you next time.